Hi, I'm Mike Hogue. I'm a member of the Socially Conscious Fire Group on Facebook, and I'm also a permaculture designer. As some of you know, permaculture means permanent culture, and it's a way that we can design a more just and sustainable society, and it usually starts by building more resilient lives, especially right in the garden and the home landscape. So it provides fire folks with a lot of tools for building more free lives that are more abundant and also help create a better world. So I would like to talk about that today. I have been a professional permaculture designer for about a dozen years now. Before that, I worked in just about every sector of the agricultural economy and a whole lot of different fields of activism and regenerative economics. I worked on farms of every scale, consulted on over 300 regenerative agriculture and farm and landscape projects, and managed farmers markets, worked on the nation's largest sustainable aquaponics facility, worked on a commodities exchange program, worked in farm credit operations. So I've had a lot of experience around this area. So this intersection between permaculture and financial resilience is really interesting to me. As I continue this introduction to permaculture, you can find a few other posts on permaculture in the Fire Group. As I continue this, I would like to focus on what is often called the most important topic in permaculture, which is permaculture asset class analysis. In permaculture, we look at everything that we do as an investment in creating better lives and a better world. So we start with this idea of analyzing the different classes of investments we can make to make sure that we're making investments that are truly regenerative. Let's take a look at that.
For this video, I'm going to assume you're already familiar with basic fire concepts and like graphs that look like this one that document our goal of reducing our spending. In a permaculture perspective, we're specifically looking at reducing our corporate spending, recognizing that these corporations are the largest drivers of climate change, mass extinction, soil loss, ocean dead zones, most of our major social problems like rising inequality. So we definitely want to reduce our corporate spending, and the permaculture goal has always been to just get people with the privilege to do so, to reduce their corporate spending by 10%. So when we do this, we could say we're divesting from destruction. Which is why we call this corporate spending the corporate supervillain dystopia fund. So we definitely want to pull our money out of the corporate supervillain dystopia fund and stop supporting these worst industries in particular. So we could say that our first goal is to divest from destruction, but we can go further than that. And, by the way, this is one of the things that makes our perspective on financial freedom a little bit different. A traditional fire approach might look at financial independence with the goal of retiring early. That's fire, right? So, but we're looking at something that looks more like free financial resilience and being economically and ethically empowered. So if we are getting to fire and getting to that early retirement, but have done it in ways that have, basically destroyed the planet, and what good is that? So instead, we want to do things in ways that will build the kind of world that we want to see. So another issue is that I don't really want to retire early. There's so much beautiful, meaningful work to do in this world, and it's urgently necessary for us to do. I just want the financial resilience to allow me to do that without exploiting myself or putting myself in harm, and with to be economically empowered to do it in a way where it's life enhancing to me and I'm free and it's sane and it's not part of this bizarre work culture that we've created as a society. So financial freedom to me is about escaping this rat race to be able to pursue what I really want. When we look at that, that changes some of what these fire benchmarks look like. So the free benchmarks will be a bit different for people and how we pursue them than fire benchmarks. as I scroll through here, we're going to try to keep this video short, but you'll see a lot of different versions of free benchmarks and approaches to free that may be able to fit all sorts of different circumstances. So another thing that's a little bit different is as we reduce our spending lower than what our earnings are, of course, we have what is conventionally called savings. But we rebrand this our transformation fund, recognizing that it's this money that we're using to transform our lives and transform the world. And we never want to lose track of that. So we call that our growing transformation fund. So again, as I scroll over here on the left, you can see quite a lot of different ideas here for how to go about getting free. And this leads us to one of our biggest ideas in permaculture, which is often called, even by its founder, permaculture's most important idea. In fact, Bill Mollison said that all of permaculture was basically just an extension of this idea of asset class analysis. And so permaculture provided a different analysis tool for looking at different asset classes. On the bottom left there, you see an example of what we'd call a degenerative asset. And a lot of these tend to be things that are basically made for the landfill, or they degenerate really quickly. And that has a degenerating effect both on us as individuals and on society. So we always want to be looking at whether we're investing in degenerative assets or the other classes here, which we could call regenerative assets, because they help promote societal and ecological regeneration. We could go into a lot of depth on these, and it's an amazing topic to do so. But today we're just going to focus in on one asset class, the most transformative assets, which we call transformative assets. And these are regenerative assets, which means they help regenerate ecosystems or society, and that they cash flow and appreciate in value. Oftentimes people only focus on cash flow, meaning they're looking for jobs, they're looking for an income, but we really need to focus on building our lives around investments that both provide cash flow and they appreciate. You know, back in the olden days, the golden olden days, you used to be able to get stocks with dividends, of course. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for things that will function like stocks that pay us dividends. Now, what could that possibly be? How could we find things that are societally regenerative and that also can cash flow and grow in equity? You see here a lot of different, as I said before, benchmarks and tools for financial freedom that we could talk about. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of scrolling through and showing all these is because I want you to know we're not just talking about one specific thing. It's not just like land-based, it's not just farming, it's nothing like that. There are all different approaches to achieving these free benchmarks with regenerative assets, transformative assets that are great for the planet and lead to real financial freedom. Some of these are like this one is a model based on doing permaculture for artists or activists or organizers. So it's a specific kind of focus on benchmarks and what the money looks like to really be able to empower people to do art or activism. So lots of different models here. Of course, this one is famous, looks like Barista Fire, or we call it Barista Free, because we're also assuming that we're putting some time and effort into permaculture investments as well. Of course, we're looking here at companies with insurance for part-timers. Okay, so that brings us to the idea of a few transformative investments. Again, these are not just necessarily natural capital, things like plants or farming. It's everything. You know, look around society. Anything that you see that is broken, that's not working well, that is an opportunity to create a better system. And a lot of this work can provide us with really great economic opportunities as well. In fact, here's a big list. Okay, so a lot of these have to do with the intersection of social systems and natural systems. Here we see some for art, for various types of farming, and what we call it, agri-tourism models. But there's a lot of just great, amazing work we could do. This one is such a great example because this feller here, Nathaniel Mulcahy, figured out a way to intervene in a system where people in a lot of the world still use open fires for cooking, and the particulate pollution is terrible for people's lungs and local air quality. So he created a type of stove that it's called a top-lit updraft stove, which produces almost no emissions of any kind, just pure water vapor. But that's not the big deal. The big deal is the amazing way he was able to get it to people while creating wealth for them. It's an amazing story. Helping people start their own businesses, creating these stoves, and even funding the fuel for them by creating local businesses. So just so many amazing opportunities here for us. But permaculture is most famous for plants and for food. So we're going to talk about one that's related to that. This is Kalamazoo's own peppermint king and regenerative agriculture pioneer and social reformer, A.M. Todd. A.M. Todd is kind of famous in Michigan for being the only elected official from the Socialist Party ever. And eventually he was able to use his wealth to start our public library, and even today, most of the mint flavoring in the world is made by the A.M. Todd Company. What's really interesting, though, is that he started out with almost nothing. He started out from a low-income family and received, with older brothers, so he received no inheritance of any sort. But he had a passion for peppermint. And his passion for peppermint grew into, from the time he was a kid, selecting peppermint, growing peppermint. He found some varieties of peppermint that today are still the main varieties used for peppermint flavorings. He was able to create a system for extracting peppermint oil, really high quality peppermint oil. So this went on to create a peppermint empire. Now, he did all this with no training in chemistry, no training in plants or horticulture, but he was also very interested in peppermint being a perennial, so that it was more regenerative and sustainable to grow. But peppermint had some issues at the time. It was subject to a blight, so he was able to find and cultivate a blight-immune variety as well. So he took a plant that was no longer available to grow as a crop in many regions, and he resurrected that and brought it back as a potential regenerative agricultural product. So now, looking at this, it has some special qualities. One, it cash flows, because peppermint is what we call a generative asset. It produces a product for us. So he can take the peppermint, he can turn it into a value-added product through this refining, which is always important, always great to do, and sell a high-quality product. He can also directly sell the peppermint. But more importantly than that is that the peppermint itself reproduces and produces more peppermint plants. So the real value here was in the intersection of intellectual capital and natural capital, the varieties of peppermint that he was producing. He was the only one who had them, and people wanted them. And this is what really made him wealthy, was the ability of this plant to grow more plants. So these kinds of peppermint can only be created not from seed, but from cutting. So they were extremely valuable plants, and that's where his wealth came from. Anyway, this is Radiator Charlie, who's famous for the mortgage lifter tomato. Now, he owned a radiator shop and was able to pay off his mortgage in 3 years thanks to this tomato. He started out with no education or background in plant propagation or plant breeding at all, but he just bred together the 4 largest tomatoes he could, selected out the best ones, bred those out until he created this mortgage lifter tomato, a huge tomato, the biggest tomato at the time, and it was also highly flavorful. So again, we're looking at something that was not only a generative asset because it produced tomatoes that he could sell, but it was also a procreative asset because the tomato plants made more tomato plants, and he was master and owner of the tomato plants. So these tomato plants, people would drive from states far away to come and buy these tomato plants. Eventually, when it came time to retire, he sold the variety and that intellectual capital and was able to retire off that. So he paid off his mortgage and retired off of the capital of tomatoes. And this is my favorite example here of this sort of thing. This is Madeline Hill, the grand dame of herbs, as a lot of us call her. And she was famous for her hilltop herb farm. Now, the interesting part of this story is that her husband actually was the one who started the farming because he was able to access capital to buy farmland off of this profitable gladiolus business stream that was going on at the time. Now, here's the thing. Anytime anybody's selling you on some sort of profitable farming business model and you're seeing profitable farming workshops, it's not. It's no longer profitable. That's the whole, basic economics here: buy low, sell high. When people are out there giving these sorts of workshops and there are magazine articles about making $1 billion on gladiolas, everybody's going to rush to it. There's a market glut. It's done. But he didn't know this, so he bought this farm based on profitable gladiolas and never made a dime on gladiolas, lost a bunch of money. Luckily, Madeline Hill found something that nobody else was interested in at the time. She discovered a love of herbs because she was traveling and found that people in other parts of the world like food that has flavor. Go figure, Americans at the time were not cooking with herbs. So she imported a lot of different varieties of herbs like Mexican mint marigold. She was and she cultivated select varieties like her own hilltop oregano, ARP rosemary, one of the coldest tolerant rosemaries around, and her famous Madeline Hill double mint, which has both the spearmint oil and peppermint oil in it. And again, it can really only be cultivated from root cutting, which makes it a very valuable plant. So and that's a great thing about these. So she had, again, something that was a generative asset, the herbs which she was using to make finished products and value-added products, but more importantly, she had invested in this intersection of plant capital and intellectual capital and found things that were some highly valuable procreative assets that grew exponentially in time with more plants, and this became the basis of her making a lot of money and paying off this land when the gladiolas failed. So it's not just plants. I really like to point that out again. Any sort of thing that you're looking at, we can deal with here. I have a business model of my own that's based on helping people transform their own landscapes based on this whole concept of regenerative and transformative assets, assets that both cash flow and appreciate in value over time. And there's so many different ways to do this. Here's one that's fantastic I just like to point out. This is Blacks and Green and the Green Living Room and some of their other things. They're focusing in on regenerative and transformative assets at the intersection of food and real estate, and they're doing it in urban Chicago. It's a Black woman-led organization, and they're doing amazing work. And there's so many different options here. So I just like to point that out. We really do have options beyond the stock market for creating real social change and ecological transformation in ways that really can lead to our own financial freedom and to a great deal of freedom to live in the way we want. So think about that as the potential dream there. We can create a livelihood for ourselves where our food needs are largely taken care of on just a few hours of work per week with the right kinds of gardening and ecological based gardening. And it can all be based on things that both cash flow for us and, more importantly, will appreciate in time so that they do reliably and predictably lead to some form of economic freedom. All right, so thanks for watching this.